So in this session, we're going to be doing a review of an internal training class we did for our Triumph staff on what's coming up with entity commands in version 2. This was also done at the conference, so if you saw this at the conference, same exact content. We just wanted to do a cleaner version just for putting up for the community. Now, the one thing we do within our internal training classes, we always have this little legal notice. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, just saying, hey, this is for training purposes only. We're trying to move quickly to give some training. It could be that there's some small syntactical issues with the lava we're about to show. And what is considered small is at the discretion of me, the author. So just a fun little thing. Hey, it's not meant to be perfect lava. We're just trying to give you concepts, not precise, perfect syntax. That said, we do try to make it work, but this is a lot of moving parts. Okay, so let's just think about this. We have a new project coming in and we need to get a list of all the financial transactions for a given giving ID. And again, remember, a giving ID is either a person or a family, and the family is really a group. So that's a little tricky. And we've been asked to list the following columns, the following fields: transaction ID, transaction date, account name, account campus, and currency type. Okay, so the first thing in your head is like, is this going to be easy or is it going to be hard? At first, it probably sounds easy, and there's actually a few little tricks in there. So it's probably not crazy hard, but it's not as easy as probably what you're thinking when you start. The next question we need to do, are we going to be using Lava or are we going to be using SQL? Now remember, we have a whole nother video on SQL, and a lot of times it's someone's go-to. Typically, the tool that you're better at is the tool you're always going to go to, and for some people that's SQL. But just realize that there are some issues with that. We have a whole video on that. If it wasn't for the new entity commands, I would probably be going to SQL though. Okay, but with the new entity commands, I'm absolutely positively going Lava, and we'll show you why. Okay, so remember, financial transactions for a given giving ID. And so we're probably, if we're going down the Lava route, especially in Lava 1.0, we're probably thinking, okay, well, I need to go to financial transaction details because that's really where the dollars are. Remember, financial transaction has more of the date and the person, but if I really want the dollars, it's on the detail. Okay, so now I'm thinking about that where clause. But now that where clause is getting really hard because the where clause has some limitations. You can filter on the properties of the entity or you can filter on the attributes of the entity, but you can't really get more than that. And I really need to use some dots in there. I need to use some dot notations because giving ID is not on the financial transaction. Okay, so that's where our first new property for entity commands comes, and that's the expression parameter. Okay, secret. Expression parameter has actually been around since version 1, the very beginning of entity commands. I just never told anybody about it because I didn't know if we could actually get it to work reliably. And then once we knew we could, then it was like, well, okay, now we're going to go to a new version of Rock someday that's going to run .NET Core, and I don't know if we can make it work there. We have now tested all of that, and we now feel comfortable with you using the expression parameter. And that looks something like this. It's kind of, think of it as kind of like the where clause, except its name is expression. But now look at this. I get to say transaction. So that's the, I'm still going after financial transaction details, but I get to call it transaction dot authorized person alias ID dot person dot giving ID is equal to P0. Whoa, okay, so that's pretty crazy because now I've done this very complex where clause that was never possible before because I have all these dots. Like I'm doing dot notation all the way down to the transaction, it's authorized person, which is actually an alias, so I had to translate that to a person and then get the giving ID. And I'm just hard coding it as P0, which typically we probably would not hard code that. And boom, now I have all my data, and that is awesome. And I know what you're thinking. Doing that whole where clause, or that expression, that's like witchcraft, right? I mean, that's so powerful. That's so great. Now, every time we do this, we should be thinking about performance. And so the load time on this was 2.3 seconds. Ugh, that's probably not great. Now, if you're just writing an internal report, rarely used by maybe one person at a time, maybe that's okay. You know, you have to like pick your battles. But if this is going to be used by more than one person, it's going to be on your external website. That is probably not great. So now, why is this not great? Why is this so slow? It's really down here in our presentation where we're iterating over all the financial transaction details. Okay, so you're thinking maybe this is all one database query, but whenever we see two dots together in our view here, you can actually think of that as a database query. Okay, so two dots in a row, two dots on a line. Now this is a pretty good approximation of how many database queries. For those of you who are super into C#, you know that it's not quite, but it's perfectly good enough for what we're doing here. Every time you see two dots, consider that database query. Okay, now we're inside of a loop though. So this, say there's like 200 financial transaction details. I'm adding a database query for each one of those 200. Okay, so I went from having one query to having 201. Doing it again. 401. Now I've got 3 here. So that's that could actually be 2, depending on how that works. So now we're in the multiple thousands by the time we get through here. Okay, and that's where the slowness is coming from. You're thinking this is one database query, but you're actually calling the database over 1,000 times. Okay, so and that's if I only had 200 financial transaction details. So how do we know this? Like the 2-dot notation, that's a good thing for you to approximate that go with that. But we've actually developed a new Lava shortcode that we're going to be giving out for free once V13's out, and it's called the benchmark. And so you just wrap whatever HTML you want inside this benchmark tag, and it's going to spit out how long it took to run and how many database calls were made. Also showing you what Lava engine is running. Now this benchmark is only going to be available as a plugin for people running version 13, and it only works with the Fluid engine. Okay, so once we all get on Fluid, this will be great. We can start using this, and that's good. Now, those of you who are very diligent might have noticed that this only took 900 milliseconds, and I told you it was 2.3. That's because this screenshot right here came from my laptop, and the 2.3 came from the server. So here's something you always have to keep in mind. Our laptops that we have are much faster than the typical cloud VM. And that seems kind of crazy because we always picture servers looking like these things over here. And that's not what we're buying when we go to cloud. We're getting specific cores on a big machine like this. And so we're only getting a very small piece of the server, whereas our laptops are actually really fast. If you have an i7 or some people I've seen have i9s, even an i5, those are incredibly fast, and they're going to be faster than the servers that we run this on. So be careful if you're ever doing things locally. Realize that you actually have a much faster machine than most servers. Okay, now if I wanted even more information about our benchmark what's going on behind the scenes, I can add this parameter here, show database queries true. Okay, now when I run it, I'm going to see every single database query, and I'm going to see how long that query took, and I'm going to see the exact SQL, and I can just copy and paste the SQL and run it. We've actually put a lot of effort into it to kind of change this SQL that was given to us by C#, and we actually put in the parameters so you can actually copy paste it. So if you're a C# person, you might have thought, no, you can't do that. It's going to have parameters and those aren't going to work. But we've actually fixed that, so you can do that. So now I can actually see these queries, which kind of helps me to understand, like, hey, I was expecting 1, now I see 1,200. If I look at these queries, I go, oh, I see what's going on. And that can be very, very helpful. Now, this whole problem that we've just discovered is a known problem. It's actually in some cases, a useful pattern, but in this case, it's turned out to be kind of slow. And that is called lazy loading. So here we have extreme lazy loading. Okay, we've gone and back to the database every time we needed something. And so the concept of lazy loading is saying, hey, I'm not going to tell you everything I want. I'll just, when I need it, you just go get it. Okay, so we're being kind of lazy. and then the computer's having to make up for that. And sometimes that's fine, but in this case, we're on the extreme of that, and that's not great. So that brings us to the next parameter, the lazy load enabled parameter. So now I'm going to go back to our same lava, and I'm going to disable lazy loading. I'm going to say, I don't want to do that. I want this to be fast. And the good news is it's now really fast. The bad news is I don't have any data, because all my data I was relying on lazy loading working, and I turned it off. So very fast, but very unhelpful. Okay, but not to fear. That brings us to the next parameter, which is the include parameter. Okay, so the opposite of lazy loading is called eager loading. Eager loading says, hey, I'm not going to be lazy. I'm going to tell you, server, all the data that I need, and while you're over there at the database, just get it all and bring it back to me, okay? So in this case, I'm going to use the include parameter, and I'm going to say, hey, while you're at the database server, get account.campus, transaction.financial payment, detail.currency type value. Now notice here I said account.campus, and down here I needed account.name too. How come I just didn't say account? I could have. You could put it there, but because I wanted account.campus, it infers that I also want account also. So this technically is not needed. Okay, so basically I've just said, hey, these are all the other entities I need while you're out there at the database. Bring them on back. Okay, now a little bit slower, not bad though. And now we have all of our data, so we fixed it. So what are you thinking now? Yeah, this is witchcraft. Like, we are doing some very powerful things, and the computer's doing it all for us. Pretty crazy. Okay, but can we make this faster? Let's see. One of the things when you're working with entity commands is that by default, it's checking security for you. Okay, so as it's going through and bringing back all this data, for each item it's bringing it back, it's checking security, saying, well, are you allowed to see this? Are you allowed to see this? Now, in a lot of cases, I would say a majority of cases, that's not needed. You, the Lava author, are already taking care of security, either through page security or something else. You're basically saying, it's okay, you can look at this. So just turning off security here will give you a little bit of a performance increase. Special note, security is checked for all entities in the entity command except person, because there really is no security on a person. So if you're just getting a person, if you just sit over here person, we've just said, hey, we've already disabled security for you. Anything else, you need to tell us to do it. Okay, so yeah, that didn't really help too much. It did a little bit. Still worth it. I would say still worth every little, millisecond is worth it, but we didn't save too much here. So, but it's worth it, and we'll see in the future that it can make a difference. So always, 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 security enabled equals false. After considering making sure that's okay, you get a free speed boost, especially with groups. If you're working with groups, the security difference you'll see, or the speed difference you'll see with disabling security is actually quite noticeable. And so if you're looking at groups, definitely turn that off. Okay, so back to where we were going. Eager loading with include. Just again, this is a refresh of where we were at. No changes yet. I want to talk a little bit though about this include. Okay, we've told the computer, the server, hey, I need all these entities while you're out there. Okay, now here's what you think you're asking for. You think you're telling the computer to go out there and just bring back this data. It kind of looks like this little spreadsheet here. So no big deal, right? But actually what we're asking for them, the computer, to do is to bring back whole tables worth of data. So bring back the whole account model. And while you're there, I want the whole campus model for it. And then I want the whole transaction and its detail. I mean, you're asking for tons and tons of data. It kind of it's like this truck. You're going out there asking for it to bring back heaps of stuff. And so, think of this as like maybe these are bags of rice. You really don't need all that rice. You just need a few bits and pieces. You literally only wanted the campus name and the account name. And you brought back the whole models for that. And those models have a ton of properties. You know that, right? So behind the scenes, the computer, is out there thinking, and it's like, wait, you asked me to bring this whole truck back. You went through a couple bags and grabbed a few, things of rice from each bag. And it's just like, that is so frustrating. I went and got all that data. I assembled it all. I carried it all back. And you only went through a few bags and picked a few grains of rice. That's frustrating. And so this goes to a universal rules that our servers deserve our empathy for a few reasons. One is you took away capacity that you paid for at the expense of other people doing the work on the server. And one of the things we need to look at is, well, that might be performant, that might have speed. You also have to consider speed at scale. Okay, so that query, it might have been fine. It was, 0.8 seconds. You might be fine with that. You might claim success. But if you put any amount of load, if you put like 5 people loading that page at the same time, it's going to collapse because it doesn't scale. It might be fast for one, but if you have 5, 10, 100, and some of the things that we need to work on need to perform that there could be, hundreds of people at any given second asking for the same thing. That needs to scale. And so we've learned that you have to test everything, not only for speed in one, but then you have to be able to load test it to make sure it has scale. Okay, so we've kind of beaten up the include command. Is there another option? And there is. It's called the select parameter. Now we're going to start to get into some technical terms, and here's what I want you to understand. Don't listen to a technical term and go, oh, that sounds scary. They're super easy, okay? We just try, whoever makes up these terms, it's not me, whoever makes up the terms, try to make them scary, and they shouldn't be. Okay, so in our select parameter, we're going to drop the need for the include, and we're basically going to tell the computer exactly what grains of rice we want while it's at the database. Okay, so the filter is the same, and we're just going to say, hey, bring me back. I want something different. And I'm going to define the grains of rice that I want. Okay, so I want to just take a look at this select. Let's just dive into the select parameter in depth. And if you're familiar with SQL, it should seem very analogous to SQL, right? It's a kind of a select command. I'm telling it what I want. Let's just kind of like clean this up and just look at the select command here. Now the select command says new, and then we get the squiggly brackets here. And that's just basically creating an anonymous type. And why do we call it an anonymous type? Is usually types, like the type of data, like a person or a financial transaction. Those are types of data. We're creating a new type of data, and it's one we're just making out of thin air. And so it doesn't have a name, so therefore it's called anonymous. So these are just anonymous types. They're not defined in rock. They're not defined in code. As we want new types, we can make our new type, and it's just doesn't have a name, so it's anonymous. So I'm saying, hey, I want a new type, and my type should have transaction.id, and I want to give it a friendly name as transaction ID. I want account name as account name, account campus.name as campus name, transaction.transaction date time as transaction date time, and then I want the currency value. So look at this. I'm going to the transaction, to its financial payment detail, to its currency type value, which is a defined value, and I just want its value as currency type, and amount as amount. So I've basically created 6 grains of rice that I want to come back. Instead of bringing back that whole truckload, I'm just getting little pieces of grain, and I'm just telling the computer ahead of time, hey, while you're over there, I need this information, but this is exactly what I need. And this is exactly the way I want to see it, and it's not a type that exists today, so it's an anonymous type. Okay? So let's go back and just see it again inside of the code. Now, if we run this, it's now 0.19 seconds. That's so much faster because we've just told it the grains of rice to go get, and I know what you're thinking. It's witchcraft. This is so amazing that we can now get back the exact data that we want and it's super, super fast. Okay, so again, we can benchmark all of this and see that, oh, look, we're down to one database call. It's always good to check this, right? One database call, 18 milliseconds. This is again on my laptop. 18 milliseconds is ridiculously fast, and that's amazing. Now, anonymous types can have a lot more power than what I showed originally. Okay, so I can return back even more data. So say I wanted to get all the mobile phone numbers for the person on that transaction. So here I'm saying transaction.authorized person alias.person.phone numbers, where the phone number type value ID is 12 mobile phones. And I'm bringing back a select within that of just a number formatted as phones. So that's what this line right here is. This last line, I've just kind of made it bigger right here. So realize that we can kind of reshape how this anonymous type looks, and we can have it have other sets of data inside of that set. And I just give it a name. And now I have mobile phones. Notice it slightly impacted my load time, but not by much at all. I went and got more information. I have a whole collection now. That's pretty cool. I know you're thinking, that's witchcraft. Now, a little bit of a random topic. It's kind of opinionated. It's a small pet peeve of mine, but naming campuses. So a lot of people would name their campus Tucson campus instead of just saying Tucson. So why does this, a small pet peeve is like you can always add campus later in your strings, but a lot of times inside the UI, you're always saying Tucson campus, Tucson campus, Tucson campus. And it's really not needed. Sometimes you want it not to say campus. You just want it to say, what is the campus? Tucson. And it's much harder to take this off than it is to append it on. Okay, so here's an example then inside of the anonymous type of me being able to add strings that I want. So I'm just showing you a new feature here, is that I'm bringing about a campus account.campus.name, and I want to append the string campus on my campus name. Okay, so if I don't name my campus as Tucson campus, I just name it Tucson, I can add campus whenever I want. Okay, so this is, think about this not only for campuses, but think of it for other things. You can kind of string together these things and bring back a field that's, you've gotten to add and append data onto it. So, and again, that costs us nothing. Okay, so let's move on. Let's look at an example. Right now, we've been only looking at financial transaction details. Okay, let's pivot for a second. Let's just see it in another context. Let's have another example of groups. So here I am looking for a groups, I should say, where their type is 25, small groups. And here is my anonymous type. Okay, I want to get in the group ID, the group name, and I want a list of all the members of that group. So I'm selecting in here to get their person name, their nickname, their last name, and then their role. So what's their role within that? So this is a very powerful anonymous type here, because I'm getting some information about the group, but I'm also returning a collection of its members, getting their name, and also the group role. So I'm like all over, like shifting all over the data here to bring back the exact data that I want. And I could even come in here and I might even want to filter this collection of members by where they're only active, or maybe by a specific role. I could do that. I'm just trying to show you a basic example here. And then once I get that, my group items are going to be patterned after this anonymous type. So now it's super easy for me just to iterate that and just say, hey, here's the group name, and then I'm going to iterate over the members and just show you all that information here. Okay, so this is what it would look like. Super powerful. And then look at the load time here, 0.04 seconds. That's super fast, super fast. So let's look at some aggregates now. So aggregates, another scary word. It's not really supposed to be. It's just basically saying, hey, I just want the count. So an aggregate here would be a count, saying, hey, don't bring back all the details of that. Just aggregate that information, like summarize that information for me. I don't need to know each member. I just need to know how many there are. In the previous example, I probably could have done that. I could have iterated over all those and counted them. I could have used Lava to see the size of the array of that. But that's not really what I needed. I don't need to bring back that information. Again, the computer's judging me. It's saying, hey, you brought back that whole list of all that information just so you could find out how many of them there were. You could have just told me you wanted the count. I would have done that for you. And so that's what this aggregate does. And so now we can see how many members there were. Now, if I were to run that in benchmark, I might expect, as I did when I wrote this Lava, I just thought, hey, I'm just going to check this in the benchmark. And I saw 10 database queries. I'm like, wait, there should only be one. Why is there 10 database queries? You know, there must be something going on here. What shenanigans are going on here? Like, there should only be one. Like, I wrote this logic. I wrote these extensions onto the entity commands. I should know what's going on. What's not going on here? It's because I didn't turn off security. Okay, remember we said earlier that security does give us a benefit, especially when working with groups. Well, here it is. Because those database calls, the way I debugged this is I enabled the showing of what those SQL calls were within the Lava benchmark tool, and I saw they're all security checks. So every single one of those groups had to be security checked. I turn off that, I'm back to one database query, and we're back to being fast. Although it was already being fast even with the security checks, but now we're not making database calls we don't need to. Okay, so a little bit of a sidetrack, but I'm glad we went through it. I'm glad I kind of created that because it made me again realize how important security enabled was, and it was a good addition to the presentation. Okay, so now back to our financial transaction example. Have we been doing it wrong this whole time though? So I took the path originally of going down financial transaction detail. But what if we went down the path of financial transaction? Instead of its detail, just do the financial transaction. Now I went down the detail path based on what I knew and some limitations in entity commands 1.0. Now that we're on 2.0, like we can just do whatever we want here. So it might make more sense to go down the path of the financial transaction. And then my expression is similar, just to get the person's giving ID. And then I'm just creating a anonymous type of its details, because now I can go both ways. I can get data from either direction that I want. And my anonymous type is a little bit different because I'm starting with a financial transaction and not a transaction detail. But I can still get all the same information, presenting it a little bit differently in terms of the user experience here. All the same information. And it's only 0.24 seconds. So just realize you have more options now. Speaking of more options, let's go back and look at the expression parameter. We kind of showed that. We didn't really show you all the power. It does have a lot of other things you can do with it. So in the expression, I can add multiple different filters, okay, using the double ampersand. And notice this. I have the ability to filter on aggregates here too. So I can say where the transaction details.count is equal to 1. So if I want to only get all the financial transactions where they only gave to one account, I could do that. Whereas before there's no way I could have done that in the filter. I would have had to write a ton of Lava to check to see how many there were, and I'd be bringing back a ton of data I simply did not need. But now you can. Okay, let's look at another parameter. It's the group by. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying I want all the people out there. I want to group by the last name. So group all the people by last name, but I only want men. And then I'm going to give it an anonymous type where I'm going to say new. And this is where it gets a little bit of confusing. You just follow the pattern here. We're going to get the key. So the key is going to be the last name, because that's what we said we wanted to group by. And then we're going to get all the people that the key represents. And that's where it's kind of a reserved word called it. So it is the things that match the key. Okay, so if we have 2 Deckers, the key will be Decker, and I will have two people as represented by it. So it would be the collection of the two people, and I'm just giving it a name, people. Okay, so then let's go down into our lava here so we can kind of see that in use. So now I'm going to say for row in person items. Person items is the collection that this brings back. I'm going to print the key, row.key, and then people, because I gave that name right here. That's why it's right here. For each person in people, I'm just going to present its last name and first name and last name. Okay, and that's what that's going to look like. Probably not the best list, but just showing you that it's there, and it is very fast. Let's use another example. This time, what I don't want to do, I was bringing back the complete person collection. So that was a lot of data. Again, that's a truckload of data when I didn't need it. All I needed was last name and first name. So here I'm doing the same thing, except this time I'm just bringing back the last name and first name. I'm not bringing back the whole person model, just the last name and first name. And so still very fast. Now this is the demo database, doesn't have a ton of people. If it had more people, this would probably be you'd see a much bigger difference between the two queries I just showed. Okay, another parameter. This one probably not going to be used that often. This one is a little confusing, so if it doesn't make sense to you, you're not probably alone, but just wanted to document that it existed. It's called select many. So in this case, what I'm doing is saying, hey, I want to get all of the formatted phone numbers for men in the database. Okay, so now the select many though, what it's going to do is it's going to run this query, but instead of returning people, it's going to kind of pivot that and return phone numbers. Okay, so it's saying, hey, I just want a list of the phone numbers. I really don't care about the people. I do need a query on the people because I needed to get their gender. I wanted it to be only males. But when I come down here, all I want is the phone number. I don't care about the people. Now it's a teeny bit confusing because it says person items here, because that's only because my entity command is a person. But the select many has pivoted it back and said, hey, I'm not going to give you back people. I'm giving you back phone numbers. And so that gives me the ability to do this phone. And since I selected only the formatted, I just put the whole thing. The whole thing is just the formatted phone number. And I'm getting it distinct, so taking out the duplicates. So again, kind of a edge casey thing, but it's nice to know it exists. And so I know what you're thinking. All of this, and that's not witchcraft, this is magic. And so I hope this kind of unlocks some ideas of what's capable with these new entity commands. And here's what I want to say. I've shown you a lot. It can actually do way more than this. It's just as much as we could put into one training class. You get a lot more power in there. And over time, we'll be working together with the community, I hope, to bring in a lot more syntax examples and a lot more different ways that you can do this. Because I think if you can just see the examples, it's easier to copy and paste than it is to figure it out. So over time, get a small group together who kind of has a deep understanding of this, and we'll try to get more and more examples for you, so that you can do more and more copying and pasting and less having to pull hair out to try to figure out how to get it to work. All right. Well, I hope this has been of interest, and hope you see how you can make things more powerful. And even in Entity Commands 1.0, understand what's going on underneath those covers a little bit more.